じゃあ、そろそろ始まる時間なので始めたいと思います。このセッションはセッション 3.4 経験の伝承に関するフォーラムということで、私 NPO 福島ダイアログの安藤涼子と、ジャン・フランソワ・ルコントが司会を務めさせていただきます。私はNPO 福島ダイアログというところで、2012年から行われてきたICRP が行ってきたダイアログセミナーの運営を一緒にやってまいりました。今日はよろしくお願いいたします。ジャン・フランソワお願いします。
Hello, everybody. My name is Jean-François Lecomte from IRSN and also from France, from the ICRP. And I am very happy and very proud to co-chair this session devoted to the memory and the transmission of the experience. Thank you.
それでは、本日の一つ目の発表の
So we'd like to move on to the first session, the first speaker by Kenji Shiga. He had been working at Hiroshima City office until 2013, and from 2014 he became the president of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. So he renewed the exhibition, and he had just retired. He is now the visiting professor of Hiroshima University. So he will talk about the trajectory and questions of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. Thank you for the introduction. I am a former president of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. This museum celebrated 65 years this year. I'm going to talk about how the museum was established, what it went through, and the challenges the museum faces. So the museum was established with a mission to tell people in all countries what happened under the mushroom cloud on that day. This is a photo taken 2 months after the atomic bomb dropping in Hiroshima. It was taken by a US Army survey team on strategic bombing. So you can see it's a panoramic photo covering 360 degrees around the ground zero. As far as you can see, Hiroshima as a city was dead. 1 month after the bombing, Shuichi Kato, a critic who visited Hiroshima as a member of medical research team, has made a following comment later on. He says, there was only roads that remained, and there was nothing, just debris. All the living things were gone, no creatures. There was a man in Hiroshima who started collecting exposed radiated items from the next day from the bombing. He is Shogo Nagaoka, the first president, and he was a researcher of geology in Hiroshima Humanities and Science University. He was out on business trip on 6th, but he came back the next day, and he got off the train at the west end of Hiroshima, and he saw gruesome, grim scenery in Hiroshima. He was totally exhausted. He wanted to rest, so he sat on a stone at a shrine. And this shrine was just near the ground zero. This is the shrine. So the moment he sat down on a stone, he felt a sharp pain. He looked at the stone, and the stone was very sharp. And he was specialist in mineral. He found out that the mineral had melted. So he wanted to find out the reason what melted the stone and what brought this appalling scenery to Hiroshima. This he walks through this scenery. You can see the smoke, and there's a atomic dome there in the center. Hiroshima mayor, who noticed these artifacts, he wanted to hand down the memories of bombing. So he talked to Mr. Nagaoka and decided to build a museum. First, this exhibition was just in the community hall, very small exhibition. According to some news, there were many visitors to this city hall. And a year later, atomic bomb archive was built next to the community hall, and it opened on August 6, 1950. And there were many visitors to this archive. Mr. Nagaoka is pointing to a shadow of a person. It's on the main entrance of a bank, which was situated 260 meters from the epicenter. Probably this person was sitting for the bank to open. We do not know who this person was. So, with high temperature, the stone had turned into white, and this stone was donated to the museum. So, the shadow was on not just granite stones, but to asphalt and gas tanks. If you connect the shadow and the material that made the shadow, you can come to converge to ground zero. You can connect this railway with the shadow and you can get to the ground zero. Mr. Nagaoka contributed to identifying the ground zero. On August 24th, 1955, Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum opened. Mr. Nagaoka was the president. At the time of opening, exhibited items were casually exposed on the concrete floor. Some say that was very powerful. However, there were few number of items, so Mr. Nagaoka made efforts to collect further materials and he engaged in surveys. This is Mr. Nagaoka went to a survey to see a horse who was 1.3 kilometers from the epicenter. The horse has keroid scars. So the collected items were rocks, melted roof tiles, Mr. Nagaoka's specialty, but it gradually expanded to include victims' clothes and mementos. Mr. Nagaoka's collection, which started from scientific inquiry, expanded to leave victims' marks on the world. People who helped him were instructed to confirm victims' names. The year after the museum opened, this exhibition on peaceful use of nuclear energy was held, and the exhibits were moved to Community Hall. That kind of usage of the museum were opposed, but it was wiped out. So this exhibition started in November 1955 and it went to 11 cities around Japan till August 1957. 2.6 million people visited. US took the lead and this exhibition took place in other Asian and European and South American companies. The newspaper then say experimented nuclear furnace models and nuclear fission diagrams were exhibited. The magic hand was very popular. And on the left hand, you can see nuclear airplane model. 110,000 visited the exhibition. This is the ticket for the exhibition. There were 5 sponsors: Hiroshima Prefecture, Hiroshima City, and Chugoku newspaper, Hiroshima University, Hiroshima American Cultural Center. 2 years after the exhibition, in April 1958, there was Hiroshima reconstruction exhibition. At that time, our museum was temporarily changed its name to Atomic Energy Science Museum. The radiation damaged materials and materials exhibited at the Atoms for Peace were exhibited. The visitors felt the horrible aspect of bombing. However, they felt a future for nuclear energy for peaceful use. So they felt the future. At the entrance, that horse welcomed the visitors. That was the last work the horse was engaged in. After the exhibition, the items for peaceful use remained as exhibited items at the museum. This exhibits of radiation items along with peaceful use items continued till 1967. However, voices against such exhibitions were raised. So there were discussions on reviewing the exhibition. So the items for peaceful use were no longer exhibited. So in 1975 and 1991, there were renewed exhibition, and it totally focused on the misery brought about by the atomic bomb. In 2019, there was a third renewal. In April, it began viewing. This is the entrance. This picture implies that the museum is focused on the damage to hospital. She has the bandage on the right hand. So if you enter, you can see what happened on August 9th, or August 6th. There are only two pictures on that day. You can see the debris and deformed iron bars, and they are not in a glass exhibition. They are reconstructed by scattering the items on the floor, and you can see the clothes worn by the middle school children on that day. So these are the memorabilium from the victims. There's a simple explanation, and we try not to have too many words. We want the visitor to just look at the items and to hear the voice from the memorabilia. The memorabilia are trying to tell something. So here the picture of the victim and her clothes. And this is the last exhibition. This was a baby born the year after the atomic bomb. The mother also suffered the radiation inside a train, and she lost her son. Now visitors will move on to the other visitors, East building. This is the word. The atomic bomb is often told by numbers and the number of deaths, but we want to look at each person's suffering. This is, well, probably the exhibition is the last one that the victims will be able to see. The biggest challenge we face is the degradation of the items. On August 6, 2015, all the museum workers cleaned the item. This is a shorthand on the clock. It was broken because of metal corrosion. So we checked all the items. So the museum has all the materials that were hit by heat ray and explosion blast. So it's not a normal degradation, but we want to restore. We have to restore and store all these items. And there are items which had not gone through radiation. Here, this photo, the family was not in Hiroshima. But they died on that day. The photos were out in the countryside. 5 children died. So the family vanished. This photo is a proof that there was such a family. So at the museum, we store everything that was dear to these victims. In the basement, we have the warehouse. We have many memorabilia and radiation blasted items. So here we have 4 rooms, and we have more than 20,000 items. Items we collected as well as ones donated by families. And people still continue to donate items. Thank you.
非常に、原爆資料館の流れがよくわかる素晴らし
So
い
we understood, it was a wonderful presentation to deepen our understanding of the Peace Memorial.
Now, let me introduce the next speaker.
それでは次の発表者をご
The
紹
next
介いたし
speaker
ま
is
す。
Professor Noboru Takamura.
高村教授でありま
He is
す。
professor and chairman of the Atomic Bomb Disease Institute of the University
長崎大学の原爆
and vice
担
director of the
当者で
Institute of
あられ
Environmental
ます。
Radioactivity of the Fukushima University.
また福島大学の環境
The
法の
director of the Great East Japan
関わられていらっしゃいます。
Nuclear Disaster Memorial Museum, and his presentation is related to this museum.
東
Professor Noboru
日本
Takamura,
大
you
震
have the
災
floor.
原子力災害伝承館についてお願いします。
Thank you very much for your introduction. I am the president. I'll be giving a presentation and introduction to the Great East Japan Earthquake and Nuclear Disaster Memorial Museum and its role. The Great East Japan Earthquake and Nuclear Disaster Memorial Museum was opened in September 20 this year. As indicated here, it is located in Futaba town in Fukushima Prefecture. It has an area of about 5,200 square meters. The structure is a 3-floor building, and you can see on the photograph on the left, it is a very beautiful building. The aerial photograph can be seen on the right-hand side. The Futaba town was located in where the nuclear power plant was located, and none of the residents has been able to return to Futaba town. And only this memorial museum and surrounding roads have been, the order for evacuation has been lifted for these areas. The basic principle of the museum is as indicated in the slides. After the disaster 10 years ago, that was the first disaster involving multiple disasters, and that's required we needed to collect and preserve and study the materials that were involved in the disaster and to share such records internationally. This is our desire for everyone who was affected by the disaster. So we would like to communicate based on the three following principles. So these are the basic three principles. The first is to pass on the future to the future and sharing to the world, meaning that we would like to share the records and lessons of nuclear disaster recovery. And secondly, we want to learn the lessons from the nuclear disaster in order that we can prevent further disasters in the future. And in the last 10 years, there have been people who have supported us for the last 10 years, the local community, and also we will also need to work on recovery of the local community culture and tradition, and further accelerate our efforts in recovery. So these are the basic principles of the museum. After the accident, disaster 10 years ago, it involved multiple disasters. And this photograph shows the guardrail that was destroyed by the tsunami. So these shows the physical damage of the disaster. Similarly, this shows the photograph of the fire truck that was damaged by the tsunami, and also some signposts, the traffic signs. And these were physically damaged by the tsunami, and we have this in our archive. So our museum includes archives of these articles affected by the natural disasters. At the same time, our archive is also on the radiation side of the disaster. This photograph shows various schools within the disaster-affected areas. So the students, teachers were gone after they evacuated. And if you look at the picture at the bottom, it says the blackboard is left as it is since March the 11th. So even today, 10 years afterwards, this it's like a time has stopped. And one of the characteristics of our archive is that it is like a time capsule. And in addition, our archive, another characteristic of our archive is how have the community has been involved with the power station and how they have, what steps they have taken for the recovery efforts. On the left-hand side is a newsletter, local newsletter, and at the bottom it says TEPCO. It's an ad of the TEPCO. So before the accident, we promoted nuclear power. We can see from this picture. On the right-hand side, it says decontamination work is progressing. So in Fukushima, we did invested a lot of energy into decontamination, and this is a testimony of that effort. So we collect these types of items. And this is the structure of the museum. We have an introduction where a video is shown for the visitors. And then they will move on to the beginning of the disaster and responses just immediately after the nuclear accident and the decontamination and the long-term effects of the nuclear disasters. And these kind of booths are displayed to show that what difficulties that the people faced and what they are doing to for the recovery efforts for the future. This is the picture of the introductory theater. So it shows how the life was before the accident and how the tsunami and the disaster happened and how the residents evacuated and how they worked towards recovery and decommissioning. So he has a record of last 7 years. And the visitors will first see this before they go into the museum. This is the first section, the first booth showing the beginning of the disaster. This shows, first of all, the peaceful daily life before the accident, and then the occurrence of the earthquake, tsunami, and the subsequent how the disaster unfolded after that. And this shows the initial response after the accident, including evacuation, as well as the attention that the accident gained, attracted from Japan as well as from the whole world. And we also use the testimony of the residents. The next booth is the sentiments of Fukushima citizens. So after they had lost their ordinary life, the peaceful life before the accident, how their life has changed after the accident. So we have collected their testimonies and memorabilia to share this information. The next booth is the long-term impact of the nuclear disaster. After the accident occurred, various effects, we had various long-term effects, and we have materials and other materials that show these effects, and also including the decontamination, and also as well as health surveys or the management of foodstuffs, including the monitoring of foodstuffs. And as the recovery became a long-term process, what difficulties they had and what steps they took. And this is the next booth is for the recovery efforts. The residents, it shows how the residents are tackling this issue of recovery. This includes decommissioning, also the efforts in the Fukushima Innovation Coast projects, and other citizens' efforts for the recovery. And the visitors will be able to think about the future of Fukushima Prefecture. In addition, we do have training courses for the general public. So that includes young people, students, as well as people who are now working. We invite many people to attend seminars and to learn from the lessons of the disaster. And this includes, for example, this is a seminar organized by Fukushima University on environmental radioactivity seminar. Many university students attended, and they were able to study about the radiation. And in our museum, we have docents, for example, who were teachers at the time of the disaster, to talk about what happened and to communicate their feelings at the time. And then the visitors can then relate themselves more closely with the accident. And with a field study, we have field study for the visitors. And this year, in September the 8th, we opened on the 20th of September, and the first 3 days, we had 3,000 visitors. As of October 24, we had 14,000 visitors, and as of yesterday, we had 27,000 visitors. So we have many visitors come to our museum already. So this uniform I'm wearing, this is the museum's uniform. This uses the color green and also Daruma, which is a character for the Futaba town. And on September 26th, the new Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Yoshihide Suga, also visited our museum. And we will continue to provide information about the museum so that many visitors can visit. So it is a very new museum, only 2 months have passed. But as I mentioned, many people have already visited, and we are very appreciative. It is a very beautiful building, as you can see. On the other hand, in Futaba, none of the residents have been able to return. So we do face severe challenges even today. And it is also difficult for overseas visitors to come to Japan under the COVID-19 situation. But we will continue to share information. And when you are able to come to Japan, please do come visit our museum. We will be waiting for you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before going on to the presentation, we do have some questions at the Q&A. If we have time after the panel discussion, we will answer these questions. But if we do not have time, we will put the answers up on the website. Thank you very much. The next presenter will be Mr. Jean-Francois Lecomte. He is from IRSN. He is a senior scientist there. He's also a member of ICRP. And he has also been involved in recovery efforts in Belarus and Chernobyl. And he has also been involved in Fukushima since 2012. And I met him in 2012 through the dialogue after the accident. And he's one of my colleagues. I recognize him as one of my colleagues. And for this presentation, he'll be speaking about Brage Museum in Belarus. So please, Mr. Lecomte.
Jean-Francois, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. First, let me thank very much the organizer for letting me making a presentation. My name is Jean-Francois Lecomte from the French Institute for Radiological Protection and Nuclear Safety, IRSN, and also member of ICRP. I was involved in post-accident situation, either in Belarus and also in Japan. And I would like to present you a glimpse at the Brage Museum in Belarus. Chernobyl was an issue questioning the meaning and the memory. Chernobyl affected all dimensions of the daily life, health, economy, environment, including the symbolic and cultural dimensions. It was a profound destabilization of the relationship between the homeland, and the homeland is a key element of culture and traditions. It was an irreversible break between before and after the Chernobyl accident. It was also a generational break between those who lived the disaster and the younger generation who didn't live. How to talk about the disaster and the contamination to young people. The Chernobyl accident created discrimination of the affected territories and their inhabitants compared to the rest of Belarus and the rest of the world. Contamination were everywhere, every day, but remained invisible. How to represent it and talk about it. And traditionally, in Belarus, the memory of Chernobyl was evocated by commemorations and tribute to the victims. Memory is a key point of the CORE program. CORE is a cooperation for rehabilitation, and the program was implemented between 2004 and 2008 in Belarus. The objective of the program was to improve the living conditions of the affected inhabitants of Belarus by involving them directly in the recovery process. One of the priority areas of the program was the culture and education of children and youth, the transmission of the memory of the Chernobyl disaster. Many questions were raised about culture and memory after the accident. For example, how to think about the disaster and transmit its memory in a way that makes sense at the local, national, and international levels. How the memory of Chernobyl can be transmitted to the future generations. How the symbolic and memorial dimensions can contribute to the future of the affected territories. Here are some words from the locals. They are the feeling of an irreplaceable loss. They said, "Here we even buried earth. We abandoned everything, lost everything, even the names of the villages were erased." And referring to the buried libraries, they said, "They even buried Dostoevsky and Shakespeare." They had a feeling of abandonment and oblivion. They said, "They don't want us, the Chernobylians, elsewhere. We have been forgotten. It's easier." In that context, the Bragging Museum was a contribution to the memory of the accident. It was refurbished with the support of the CORE program. And now they have 4 sections in this museum. The first is an exhibition of works by painters native from the 30-kilometer forbidden zone. The second one is an exhibition of objects also from the 30-kilometer forbidden zone. The third one is a tribute to the young firefighter of Bragging victim of the accident. And the last one is an exhibition called The Lost Land. You can see here the Bragging Museum. Here is a map of Belarus, and you can see Bragging, which is a village on the southeast of the country, very close to the Chernobyl nuclear plant, and of course, very close to the forbidden zone, just on the outskirts. Some pictures of works from native painters. As you can see, it is dark, but not Here is a picture with local objects coming from the 30-kilometer forbidden zone. They are traditional objects. Notably embroideries and some kitchen tools. Here is an old-fashioned device for measurement of radioactivity. Here is a picture related to the tribute to the young firefighter of Bragging, victim of the accident. His name was Vasily Ignatenko. He was born in Bragging in 1931 and he died on 30th of May 1996 at the hospital number 6 in Moscow. Here is a bragging memorial with the names of the lost villages on the monument, on the memorial, and with the bust of the young firefighter. Now, the exhibition, The Lost Land. This exhibition was the result of a cooperative work between the inhabitants of Bragging, notably 6 groups of adult volunteers, and artists as well as museography professionals. During the preparation, the inhabitants developed a narrative about what they saw and what they experienced. They expressed their suffering as well as the beauty of their land and why they wanted to stay. This is our place, they said. They also collected a lot of materials, testimonies, documents, photos, etc. Here is the entrance of the Lost Land section of the Bragging Museum. You can see several objects coming from abandoned dwellings in the 30-kilometer zone. Traditional broderies, the map of the country with contaminated territories, other objects and pictures and traditional views, etc. Here is showing an acculturation phenomenon. I mean, it is an appropriation of the symbol of radioactivity in traditional embroidery, as you can see. You can see more in detail in this picture. You can see the trifles of radioactivity inserted in traditional embroidery. What are the lessons from the Lost Land exhibition? The exhibition made it possible to build a common narrative. I mean, both inhabitant and expert of memory about the situation. It offered another way of thinking about the accident and experiencing the situation. It favored making the link between the past, the disaster, the present, life in the territories, and the future. It is a tool for sharing, communicating, and educating children without going through the technique. It is a work of the meaning of the accident and living in the affected territories, and not on its management. To finish, you can see here drawings of a Bragging school child. I thank you very much for your attention.
Jean-François、ありがとうございました。ここまでで
Jean-François, thank you so very much. We covered that Hiroshima, Fukushima, and Belarus. And we shared the information of the 3 areas, the 3 museums. Thank you. Next, we would like to move on to the panel discussion. Jean-François, could you start with the introduction of the panelists?
Yes, now let me just introduce this session, and I give the floor to the moderator with the co-chair Ryoko Ando. You have the floor.
はい。ではですね、今回のこのパネルディスカッションですが、テーマをですね、原子
So
力
this panel discussion, we have how to overcome the difficulty to talk about the experience of nuclear accident is the theme of this panel discussion. The nuclear accident, not just limited to Fukushima, we have Mr. Shiga from Hiroshima, and also is a panelist who was active in Belarus. So we just like to take a look at the whole nuclear accident. Let me introduce the panelists. Mr. Shiga and Professor Takamura. I already introduced them. Toshiko Aoki, she is from the group telling about Tomioka on 311 from 1970 to 2008. She used to be a teacher of Japanese language in a high school in Tomioka, and after the disaster, she has been active. And Atsushi Chiba, in 2011, at the time of accident, he was a physics teacher at a high school in Fukushima City, and he conducts the classrooms on radiation, and he deals with social issues as well. And Miku Endo, so she is started working at the Great East Japan Earthquake and Nuclear Disaster Museum. She was in grade 3. At the time of disaster, she evacuated to Iwaki City, and she graduated from Futaba Mirai High School and now is working at this museum. And we also have Terry Schneider. She is the CPN and ICRP Radiation Protection Committee. And he was helping people, the victims after the Chernobyl, and he has been to Fukushima many times after the accident. So we have 6 panelists. Have posed a question already to the panelists. So the first question, so have you felt difficulty in talking about the experience of nuclear accidents? Do you face difficulty? Why do you face difficulty? So each panelist has 4 minutes. Mr. Shiga, please. Hi, my name is Chiba. Asaka High School, I have classrooms and I teach about not just radiation, but issues of restoration and social issues. And Thierry Schneider, we have here as a panelist. He comes every year. So we go to Fukushima Daiichi plant. We bring the students there and go around the affected area. I handed out this one, what the Asaka High School is doing. Before I state my comment, I'm sorry, I don't think you can see it, but so various high schools also participated in this interview. We have these high schools in Fukushima. The knowledge towards radiation is still low in high schools. I asked whether students have gone through education on radiation, but there are many high schools which do not teach this. So honestly, we do not have this culture of teaching the students about radiation. I would like to write a thesis on this topic. For example, if you have a student who went through the radiation classroom, they do not know about the result of rice radiation. How many, what is the percentage of the area affected by radiation? Some, they just have wrong answers. They don't even know the size of the area affected by radiation. I have felt that this might be the case, and now I confirmed it through interview or questionnaire. So the difficulty, have I felt difficulty in talking about the experience of nuclear accidents? Yes, I have felt difficulty many times. Right after 2011, to deal with this issue at classroom was a very delicate issue because I did not have any materials or data. Students asked me very serious questions like, will I be able to have baby in the future? So it was very difficult and painful for me to answer this. Right now we have data, and I have improved my classroom or teaching methods, so I can now talk about it. Now, there are three difficulties where students talk about it. Every year when I have class, last year I talked to 500 students. What I feel, there are 3 points. One is that these students do not have any knowledge, basic knowledge, like the radiation test or the grade 10. They were elementary school children at the time of accident. It's really the responsibility of teachers that they have not taught them. But it's a delicate issue, but at least minimum knowledge should be uh, there. Second point, the experience is too severe, difficult, and it's difficult to talk about it. And I am at Koriyama, but there are students who have suffered the nuclear accident. But everybody sees this as an important issue. So I always say, let's talk about the lessons learned. And the high school students are quite active, so the students feel this is an important topic. Now, third point, we have not really summarized the lessons. Hiroshima, Nagasaki people, they always urge people for peace. So it's very difficult to talk about it or to summarize it in a simple word. Thank you so much. Can we move on to Mr. Aoki? Mr. Aoki. Thank you. This is Yoshiko Aoki. From 2013, the Great East Japan earthquake, especially I'm from Tomioka town in Futaba district of Fukushima. So it's 2 stations away from the disaster museum, and it's about 10 to 20 kilometers from the nuclear plant. About 7,000 people come to, so we tell our story. From 3 years ago, the evacuation order was partly lifted. So I take people, visitors around the Tomioka town. I tell them what happened on that day and what people experienced and what the town is situation is right now. I myself, when the evacuation order was lifted, I now live in Tomioka town for 3 years. Talking about this experience is very difficult. One point is that nuclear accidents, at the time of Great East earthquake, there was earthquake and tsunami, but the nuclear accidents are not visible. You can't see it. And as Mr. Chiba said, within Fukushima Prefecture, there's direct affected area. Futaba County and other areas. So people outside the district do not try to know the true effect of nuclear accident. How do we overcome that is difficult. Like, when do I feel difficulty? First, when there's a symposium on East Japan earthquake and I am cold, and so there's people who talk about tsunami, but I talk about this multiple complex disaster. Of course, there were my experience is a bit different from those people who experienced tsunami, because not many people died, the houses remain, but it's not habitable. Why can't we live in our own house? And those houses are being dismantled now. And in Futaba, there are so many land without any buildings, and decontamination has not finished, even though 10 years have passed. So it's really horrible. This nuclear accident is changing people's lives bit by bit. So physicists and doctors only talk about data, but this accident changes people's lives, even with decontamination. So it really changes people's lives from the basis. And 10 years on, we can still see the clear solution. And it's so difficult to tell people about it. Right now, we have this nuclear disaster museum, and we have visitors from outside the prefecture. So now maybe we can tell the people to different, the experience to different people, to different generation. Now, can we ask Miku Endo? Thank you. This is Endo. So, what have I felt from the nuclear accidents? On March 11th, I was at 50 kilometers from the plant in Iwaki City. 3 days after the accident, there was a disaster of radiation. So my parents decided to evacuate to Tokyo, and inside the car, it was hot. But my parents told me that there is radiation risk. So they told me not to open the window. So it's invisible but scary. 2 weeks after the disaster, the school was to open. So we came back on March 28th. So I thought our lives would go back to normal, but that was not the case. Many friends did not come back. We didn't even say goodbye, and so it was painful. And there were people from Futaba to Iwaki. I had new friends. I was in grade 4, so I experienced goodbyes and new friends. So I started to learn about nuclear accidents because I went to Futaba Mirai High School in Futaba. We conducted field work and future project towards future. I found out the actual situation. And in grade 12, when I was thinking of my future, my teacher told me that there will be nuclear disaster museum open soon. By the establishment of this museum, the Great East Japan earthquake and the nuclear accident will not wither away, but I thought this could be handed down. And the teacher told me that disaster museum will play a big role in Fukushima. So when they asked me about working at the museum, I really felt, although I have not really experienced the disaster, will I be really fit for the museum? I wasn't sure. And so I spent 3 years in Hirono, and I was supported by
Now I'd like
Hirono
to
people. So I wanted to pay
contribute to the
back
work
to
of
these
recovery,
people. So I decided
and
to
I
work at the
decided
museum.
to work at the museum. been working at the employment for the last 6 months, and for the last 10 years. Why did the accident happen? Why are there people evacuating? And why are there people who are critical about the disaster? And this has not been clear to me during the school years, but after I decided to work at the museum, I have been able to learn and to listen to a lot of people and to look at different materials. But I still only have several months of experience, so it is sometimes difficult for me to talk about the disaster to other people. And after I was employed, I was interviewed by people, and I tried to remember about the day of the disaster, and sometimes I get emotional. But because I'm working at the museum, I think it is important that I tell my candidate views. And as I continue to work at the museum, I will try to be able to tell about the museum, the exhibits, and to convey what it was like at the Fukushima at the day and what Fukushima is doing towards recovery, and thereby contribute and repay the people of Fukushima. This is what I'm feeling today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Shiga, please. For me, this is not about radiation for Fukushima, but I'll be talking about the Hiroshima experience. So as for your question on whether there's difficulty talking about our experience, I think the answer is yes. And in my presentation, I talked about the Mr. Shuzo Kato. He was a doctor at the time, and he recorded that by experiencing disaster, the people hesitated to talk about their experience. And there was a huge gap between us and them. And this period continued for a while, during which time I could not tell my story. But then people asked us to tell our story, and then there were the roles played by the docents. So there was a obstacle. I think there was time was needed before we could start talking about it. So I have never heard about the Hiroshima from my own family. And my grandparents was burned from the Hiroshima accident. I have not heard much about the accident from them. But after the lapse of time, and then only people can start talking about the experience. And we also have opportunities for telling our stories to students. And now, all the people who are exposed in Hiroshima are getting old. And there is a movement towards encouraging them to speak up. And in Hiroshima, a lot of people are beginning to speak up. And I did hear that from people that people who come from other prefectures, they have no opportunity to express themselves, to speak. There is no dialogue. And in addition, for those young people who are born in Hiroshima, they are flooded with information, and they no longer want to listen to the experiences. So there is also difficulty there from a different aspect of things. So why is this happening? Why is it difficult? This is not an easy answer to answer. It is beyond our imagination. The experience itself is beyond our imagination. And people are resigned that even if they told about the experience, it would not be understood. And I was born after the war, so I would never be able to tell about the experience. But as a director of the museum, sometimes I was asked about my family's experience, who were actually in Hiroshima. And at those times, I say I only can talk about general aspect. And so I do feel there's a gap between those who are affected and who are not affected. And I think this is the same situation. If we have a devastating disaster, there are people who we might build barriers between the speaker and those who's receiving the information. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Schneider, please.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to give a few words about the difficulty to speak about the recovery process and the experience. I just would like to emphasize two facets of this problem. The first one, the difficulties that I had with my colleague when we arrived in Belarus in the 90s, after the Chernobyl accident, to discuss the problem of radioactivity with people from the village of Olmani. In fact, as radiation protection experts, we arrive with all the concept, the risk calculation, the measurement of radioactivity, but then we start to discuss with the people, but that was two different worlds. And then it took some time for the position of experts that we had to move progressively and to listen to the people. And I think it was mentioned several times during this session. It's quite important, first of all, in order to discuss about the radioactivity and to discuss about the recovery situation, to really start with, not to start with science. Of course, science is important to be provided, but the key point is really the daily life of people. And then it's why progressively we move to what we had as a scientific position towards something which was much more what we call the practical radiological protection culture, which start with the concern of the people and then try to identify where is the radioactivity, how people are exposed, and what they can do to improve the situation, but really starting not from a conceptual approach, but from practical approach, and also to move from what we call the scientific approach towards the strategic approach. The key point is really to improve the daily life and to have a cooperation with the people in order to improve the situation. So this is the first element, and at the end, I think one of the key points is not really to have a specific value which is sufficiently precise in terms of Becquerel in the environment and so on, but it's really to see in which way you can discuss the quality of the quality of the environment, the quality of the life, and how far it has been disturbed by the accident and how to improve. The second point, very briefly, is the opposite. In fact, when we discuss our experience with our colleague in the radiation protection community, then people were not able to understand. That was a difficulty for the expert to catch what is really the daily life of the people. As one of the speakers mentioned, the accident changed people's life. And then the expert need to start with that, and it's quite difficult for the expert to really address that. And I think one of the key points, and it's why the museum and sharing experience is quite important. It's the only way for the expert and for all the other people outside the Fukushima area to really understand what is at stake. It's really to exchange with people, to get the testimony of the people, and then, of course, to visit and to come to see what is a reality. And so this is quite important to do that. And it's why currently in radiation protection, there is a promotion of stakeholder involvement. I think it's quite important to rely on that. And the transmission is one key element with regard to that. So I will stop my speech here and can come back later. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Takamura, please. So I am the director of the museum. At the same time, I am an expert on the radiation, and I've been working as an expert in Fukushima, and I'd like to tell my experience from that point of view. Before the accident, I was working in Chernobyl, and because of that experience in 2011, when the accident occurred, I returned to Fukushima, and I promoted crisis communication in partnership with the residents. And on that day, there was an issue of evacuation, and there was a fear of radiation among the residents. So it was people were in panic, and I was trying to provide communication to them, and it was very difficult. It was completely different from university lectures. So the first cause, why is it difficult? That is because radiation is not visible. There's no sound, there is no smell. It is not tangible. And I had to explain about this. And it is very difficult to explain something that is not visible. At that time in Japan, there was air dose was about 225 microsievert per hour. In Itate was 45 microsievert per hour. So these data were available, but the meaning behind it, there were no people who were able to provide that, and that was the cause of the confusion. So I tried to convey the meaning of the data. That was where I placed my focus. For example, what does 45 microsievert mean? What does 10 microsievert mean? What does my 1 microsievert mean? What does that mean for the people? That was the first step. I think that was the first important thing to do. And then after the accident settled down and decontamination started, return of people started, then people now already have their own personal dosimeter and they're monitoring their own environment. And the important thing is to convey what the meaning of the measured data. So what does 5 micro? So we try to provide explanation about what the data means for each of the residents. So this has been a focus of my recovery efforts. So it is a very difficult question to answer. But as for the experts, it is mainly related to the difficulty involving the difficulty of explaining the meaning of the data. The radiation is not visible, but it is it can easily be measured. That's all for me. Thank you.
それぞれのいろんな経験、いろんなお立場からの非常にそれぞれの言葉を聞けてとても。
So thank you very much for your comments. Very meaningful exchange of views, I think.
他の方の回答を聞いて、この語りにくさを乗り越えるためには何が必要なのか、どうすればいいと思いますか。
So what do you think? So the time is sort of pressing. Can you limit your answer to 2.5 minutes? Thank you very much for your cooperation. First of all, Mr.
Shall we
Chiba,
start
please.
with Mr. Chiba? Thank you. Especially Aoki-san and Shiga-san focused on this, that the gap or that is something that you have to tide over if there is a gap. And there are 3 point opinions of mine. One is that education, because I'm an educator myself, is very important. I visited the Minamata city of Kumamoto 3 years ago, and Kumamoto citizens, without fail, that visit the Minamata during these elementary school days and middle school days. And Kumamoto is suffering from that bad reputation, but they have recovered to a admiral state. And so first of all, that the local people in the same prefecture have to visit, remove that the prejudice, and of course that there are plus and minus for what happened. However, that to come close to those people who were very working hard for the recovery, so that inside of the prefecture, that the communication is important, and which then go outside of the prefecture. And many people come from the outside of the prefecture for the school trips, but then we have to have a better communication within the prefecture first. So, number two, the knowledge of radioactivity. As the speaker says, that it is very important right after the accident, right at this moment. Further, not only the radioactivity and the knowledge is accumulating, and we have to communicate, exchange opinions over the accident, disaster as a whole. When I participate in the training with the students, at the end, I ask that I write my opinion summary. I cannot disclose everything, but you see that, well, this is the final opinions or the impression of the students and myself. Well, I hesitate to show all of them because some people can identify by the writing. But anyway, that our students fill up this page in 15 minutes because the students has a lot to talk about after the visiting of the disaster area. And first that we have to, that the adults should understand first, and not the protection, but we have to create the culture of the protection and communicate elaborately. Thank you, Aoki-san. In order to tide over that, well, we have to have an imagination to put that yourself into the other people's shoes. Then imagination is essential. Imagination is a power which is bestowed only on the human beings. And they are totally different geographically and time-wise. I have nothing to do with this, but discard all this. And what happened with Fukushima, Futaba, are not only that the localized narrative. No, that this can be happen in any places in Japan, any places in the world. In this sense, that the 11th and 12th of the March of the 2011, that the nuclear accident happened in Fukushima, have to be communicated to the people who have a good capacity of imagination to learn from this. And this is the purpose of that telling the story of the music. Well, there are no restrictions on me of very freely talking about my own thinking over the accident. And those people that who listen to me, well, if there is only one person to think with together with me, that is a way of the recovery. Tomioka, well, 16,000 people used to live. Now, 1,500. And so half are from the original residents, but 1,500 who are the residents, and 10,000 people cannot return, but they have to get together for create the community into the future. And then listening to our stories, personalize our stories as a part of their life, that we have to gradually increase this kind of people. So this is for tiding over that the roadblock of hard of understanding. Thank you very much. Endo-san, your input. Yes, indeed. For that, well, in order to tide over difficulty, that we have to have a better idea of learning, motivated to learn. I have to learn a lot from the experience, knowledge, and then I can expand the horizon of a narrative. And also by discussing that what they are thinking of the elderly people, of the people of the same age, what are your feeling, and the episodes for exchanging. These are a very good way of deepening my understanding and knowledge. And also that for the communication museum, well, inviting the people to this museum is a very good way of tiding over that there are the videos and the storytellers, the stories can be, you can listen to this, and so that the accident time, and after the accident, you can learn that activities and also the experience, and you can learn that the days of the accident, but well, toward the recovery, that I would like to explain the real time, the Fukushima marching toward the recovery, and for the nuclear accident and the disaster, we communicate the facts and truth that you can learn a lot. For the nuclear accident, to talk about the nuclear accident, yes, indeed, it's difficult, it's challenging, and so that we cannot remove this difficulty 100%. No, however, you can personalize that the experience of yours to expand that experience, and with this, you gradually reduce the hurdle.
ありがとうございます。次、
Thank
志賀
you.
さんお願いします。
Shiga-san, your input, please.
はい、ごめんなさい。
Sorry,
ミュートを解除したんですけど大丈夫ですね。
can you hear me?
先ほど青木さんがおっしゃった
And earlier, Aoki-san says that imagination
原爆資料館の展示でも重要な
is also a very important keyword of the nuclear museum, atom bomb museum, that in order to encourage the people and heighten the imagination, that we changed the exhibition for this, encourage the people to imagine deep. But in order to do so, as Chiba-san pointed out, that how to fill up the gap, or how to tide over, jump over the gap. I would like to share with you some of the examples I experienced. First of all, that the same generation, and in the museum, that the storytellers tell the story of their experience. That the targets are the school trip students at the elementary school and middle school students. So the speakers experience an atom bomb when that the audience age. And so listening side audience imagine probably that in their own age that this person experienced this. This is almost a common language between them. Or this person experienced when he or she was my age. And the proper noun, number two, proper noun. Well, quite often that people resort to the statistics and numbers or one big event of the history. In a certain university, when they gave a lecture, that the response of the students was very impressed me. Said that the student from Hiroshima, so that he or she visited a number of the times the museum and listened to the storytellers, and this he or she thinks that, oh, no more, that I'm sick and tired of this. But the impression changed, because that in the 18 and well, I talked about that the woman giving birth, and the woman suffered the great the burn, severe burn, and the midwife suffered the burn, and that the mother died after the giving the birth delivery. And the tools used for the delivery was exhibited in front of them. And the proper noun, the mother's name was very clearly shown. And then this 18-year-old woman says, oh, at that time, there is the individual that delivered right inside of during the time of the atom bomb. And somebody is probably living right now. So this was the first time that this woman was seeing the proper noun. It is not just the event of the history. Well, this is a personal history. That there is that actual living person and a part of the experience, and she personalized. Thank you. Schneider-san?
Yes, thank you. So I just would like to emphasize that we are now 10 years, close to 10 years after the accident. And for me, this question of the transmission of the experience and transmission of the memory is quite challenging nowadays. In fact, there is maybe a temptation to turn the page, to go ahead and to forget about the situation, while in fact, I think it's really the crucial moment for us to think about what to do to transmit this experience and what is the meaningful of that. I really emphasize the key point which have been mentioned by Mr. Takamura with regard to the objective of the museum. The key point for the memory is not only to think that to tell the history, but it's also to go towards the future. And it's quite important with regard to that to establish some cooperation. With regard to the cooperation, we already, so Mr. Shiba mentioned the cooperation that we have with young generation, with high school, which is quite important, but it's also quite important to foster the cooperation in different domains, to favor the discussion between people and not as between experts, but really between people. I have in mind the discussions that have been established between Norway citizens and Fukushima citizen, and also with Belarusian citizen. So this is beyond the question of scientific expertise. It's really the life of people, and I think it's quite important to emphasize this element, to think what could be transmitted in order not to forget what have been done, what people, the situations that people were confronted with, and also to organize the vigilance. With regard to the presence of radioactivity, which is still there in Fukushima area, in some, notably in the forest, in the mountain, but also to think about what lessons learned for preparing to future disaster, or to better cope with future disaster. And I think that was clearly summarized in the objective of the Futaba Museum. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。では、高村
Thank
さ
you
ん、お
for
願い
your input. Takamura-san, please. Already that Mr. Endo did a good job of explaining the museum. I don't have too much to add on except one. That is, for the future, we have to learn the history for the future. That is very essential. That is, before the Fukushima accident, how much we learned from the Chernobyl. Well, the increase of the number of the cancer increased. We knew, but why? What is the difference and the similarity between the Chernobyl and Fukushima? Did we know? And in order to understand this, we should have learned more from the history, from the past. And this is also connected with the learning that Fukushima now, and that is a contribution the museum can do. And one more, and in order to learn and understand, we have to have an educational platform, foundation for this. The biggest element is a scientific education, science education, technical education. We have to seriously consider these two. And through this, that science and technology, what should be taught to really appreciate that the similarities and difference between the Chernobyl and Fukushima, that the students can build up this capacity of understanding this, learn from the past, whatever that past will be internalized inside of you, And the tool for this is education. Thank you. I think that this is all the comments we can extract from the panelists. I would like to summarize. Counting this, and 75 years passed from Hiroshima, 35 from Chernobyl, and nearly 10 years from Fukushima. This is a chronological order, and it's flow the time. And there are different challenges of each turning point, as Shiga-san pointed out, and also that the Schneider's comment are very relevant, and Fukushima's comments that we have a clear view, overall view. That is to communicate. Whatever we say, communicate that the past is very stable and still, and we can bring it to the forward. But considering the chronological order and also listening to the people who experienced, but while communicating is that so we have to reconsider the significance of the past. Past is not the solid, stable thing. So that's what I felt. What to communicate equals what kind of the future we would like to build up. So this is a continuous operation. In Hiroshima, 75 years passed since atom bomb attack, but the operation continues. And Fukushima will be the same 75 years from now. So that what will be that the significance of that experience of Fukushima atom accident and what kind of that the significance you would like to emphasize, and the common language also. That the past event, the present, and the future, and going over the geographical border. But we can, well, this is very difficult to speak about, but because of this, so because of that we have to work continuously hard to create the common language among us. So that I will return the microphone to the Jean-Francois.
Thank you very much, Ryoko. I also would like to add some words in terms of conclusion. It was a very interesting session. First, we had three presentations related to museum, which were related to three nuclear catastrophes, Hiroshima, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. And this museum showed the need to transmit memory through photography, through object, testimony, experiences, data, not only for a purpose of emotional and commemorative purpose, but also because it is a way to go forward, to rebuild the future positively. And this dimension was clearly shown through the panel, which was very interesting too. And this panel, the main lessons was that the catastrophe, when it happens, is very sudden. It is a break for everybody. Nothing is like before. And radioactivity is not well known. It is not visible. It is not tangible. It provokes fears, and it is difficult to talk about that, to explain what happened. And then we have science and knowledge, but it is not sufficient because the impact is in the daily life, and we need to make a link between this science and the daily life, and it is difficult. It is also difficult to transmit experience to outside the affected territories. And there is many misunderstanding, many confusion, and also discrimination. And to deal with that, to address that, there is a need to people, notably to experts, to adapt their language, to listen carefully the people, for experts and also for teachers and so on. There is an importance to think about the future. And the means to pass some messages could be through educations, through measurement, which make radioactivity visible, through cooperation between people, bodies, etc. And the museum, it was shown through the panel, the museums are a good tools to play a key role in a way to get exchanges, to pass the memory, to pass information, and to have an opportunity for people to exchange the one with the other. And the aim of this issue is not to forget what happened, but to take lessons of this experience, to keep vigilance in affected territories, and to organize the preparedness everywhere outside, because a new catastrophe could happen. And it was a very interesting session, and I would like to thank very much all the organizers, all the speaker, my co-chair, Yoko Ando. It was a very great job. And also the auditors of this session. Before we stop this session, I would like to give you an information. There are 2 complementary sessions which are available on the website. One is related to the development of disaster simulator, the legend of Kawachi, as a disaster response training software. And the second one is a feedback assessment from the audience as part of the health literacy training for health professionals, and a case study from Fukushima after the nuclear accident. The second one is from Aya Goto from FMU, and the first one is from Airi Fumi Azegawa from FMU2. Thank you very much. Perhaps, Yoko, you would like to finish the session.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Okay. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Is there some question? Is there catch the question? We can.
切れちゃったのかな。わかりました。